Peter, obviously, so many Americans hoped it wouldn't come to this, but now here we are. What changes tomorrow, not just for Americans, but also for this political fight that they are basically stuck in the middle of?
Yeah, I mean, look, they have done a lot to try to mitigate the public impact when it comes to the shutdown, now a month old. But this is when it really starts to hurt a lot of people. This is when it starts to get past the political inside the Beltway fighting about who's winning and who's losing and all that kind of stuff, and it affects real lives. Now, whether that has an impact on the representatives in Washington or not, whether that convinces people to find a way to make this end, it's unclear. There doesn't seem to be a crisis atmosphere in Washington, even though it's going to be a crisis out in a lot of parts of the country, right? The president, as you said, was out of town most of the week in Asia, now leaving town again to go to his estate in Florida. Congress, the House hasn't been in session in a month, the longest it hasn't been there for decades, apparently. You see no sense that there's any kind of urgency about finding a way to resolve this, because both sides are kind of planted in for the principles that they're espousing and the politics that they're playing.
It does seem, Nick, that the only people who are sensing crisis are the people who are stuck in the middle of it, the American people. You've written so extensively and so brilliantly about the impact of everything from poverty to dysfunctional governments all around the world. So when you see this happening here in the United States, what do you think?
I mean, it's kind of heartbreaking to go from covering humanitarian crises and hunger in other countries to covering that right here in, the richest country in history of the world.
That line of cars in Phoenix now.
Absolutely. And, I live now, as you know, in a working class area in Oregon that is both Trump voting and also quite dependent on food stamps. And, I got a call yesterday from an old friend who pays almost no attention to what is happening in politics and government, just no attention. But he called yesterday, desperate for information about when the shutdown will end and when food stamps, when SNAP benefits will be restored. And, that's because, he has an infant and he's got his own little moving company. He doesn't know whether he can afford to buy food.
Yeah, he's like so many people we heard, they work. They just need that little extra help, like we heard from those two folks. Senator, let's figure out where we are now. I mean, this is not the first time that there's been talk of ending the filibuster, but I wonder what your reaction is to the president responding to all this, not by negotiating, but by putting forth this demand and the filibuster. That's the answer.
Well, I just want to back up just for a second, if I might, Chris. I mean, look, this shutdown could end in the next few hours if folks could get together and reinstate the health care insurance supplements so that insurance rates don't go through the roof. The fact is the filibuster has had bipartisan support for the entire time I was in the Senate, and I think long before that. And I think the fact that the president, who, by the way, could end this shutdown immediately by just telling the Republicans in the Senate to negotiate, by saying that we're going to undo the filibuster is more of my way or the highway. No compromise. We're just going to do this, and that's that. When in fact, good policy comes from people sitting down and compromising and finding a middle ground. You do away with the filibuster, that's gone. And quite honestly, it will be interesting to see what the folks that I served with that have always supported the filibuster because they understand it makes for better legislation are going to do now that the president has said do away with it. Because in the last 9 months, every time the president's told the Senate and the House Republicans to do something, they've done it and without any questions. And it'll be interesting to see what happens now.
Nick, I can't get that friend of yours out of my head because he's representative of so many people. Not everybody follows every snippet of the news every day, right? And I was thinking about an 85 or 90-year-old who doesn't use a computer, who doesn't read the paper, but opens up a bill on health insurance and finds out that $900 they absolutely don't have on their Social Security. That's their income, right? They don't have necessarily the experiential wherewithal to know what to do, nor do they have Nick Kristof on speed dial. So what does that mean for them?
Well, look, I mean, there are going to be, of the 1 in 8 Americans who are on SNAP, there are going to be plenty who are going to figure things out. They're going to have parents, they're going to have a relative,
Yep.
There's going to be a local food bank. There are going to be plenty who are going to work things out. But that's a lot of people. And there are also going to be so many who are like a household I once visited in Arkansas, where there was a 12-year-old boy who I was interviewing because he was kind of on the cusp of trouble. And we spent time in that house. There was no food in that house. And every month at the end of SNAP benefits, there was no food in the house until the next benefit rolled into their account. And, now it's maybe okay if it's a day or two, you can survive. But if it's a prolonged period in households like that, and there are many of them around the country, people are really going to be struggling.
Michael, so let's talk about what's happening on Capitol Hill. Still no sign of the House coming back. And is there any reaction at all to what the president had to say as an offer of how to end this?
Yeah, Chris, it looks pretty likely that this call for the filibuster to be abolished by President Trump is falling flat up here on Capitol Hill. This was always the expectation that folks had because there are so many stalwart defenders of the filibuster still serving in the chamber. Chief among them is Senate Majority Leader John Thune. Earlier this month, even, he had said that the filibuster was a bulwark against a number of things that could have harmed the country. He also argued that the legislative filibuster is what makes the Senate. And early this morning, we're getting indication that his feelings on the procedural matter have not changed. We have a statement from the leader's spokesperson, Ryan Rassi, who says that the leader Thune's position on the importance of the legislative filibuster is unchanged. So, Chris, look, we discussed that it's not every day you see Republicans in either chamber go against President Trump on a matter. And when it happens, it's significant. And it's not just in the Senate. Now, of course, the House doesn't really have a stake in this debate. But we did hear from Speaker Johnson yesterday, who in the past has defended the legislative filibuster, another very close ally of President Trump, who often backs him up on a number of different things. Speaker Johnson this morning also saying that he is a believer in the filibuster. Take a listen.
What you're seeing is an expression of the president's anger at the situation. I'll just say this in general. As I've said many times about the filibuster, it's not my call. I don't have a say in this. It's a Senate chamber issue. We don't have that in the House, as you know. But the filibuster has traditionally been viewed as a very important safeguard. If the shoe is on the other foot, I don't think our team would like it.
So, Chris, in sum, it does not look like the filibuster will be changed, those Senate rules will be changed to end this government shutdown. But the fact that President Trump is floating it, and we've heard it be floated from some other Republicans on Capitol Hill as well, underscores the real impasse that lawmakers find themselves in. In fact, next week we can be talking about the history books. If this shutdown stretches into Wednesday, which would be the 36th day of the shutdown, it would be the longest funding lapse in U.S. history, breaking the record that was set back in 2018 and 2019 during President Trump's first term.
Michael Schnell, thank you for that. Peter, the president, as I noted, he spent the last week overseas. Now he's heading to Mar-a-Lago. Why isn't he more involved here? Why does he seem to be focused on so many other things, but saying virtually nothing about the shutdown?
Well, in part, he doesn't want to be held hostage to it, right? I think he, understands that if he's talking about other things, that most of us are talking about other things, right? That he has an ability to command the stage and dominate the conversation like no other figure in our politics. And so if he's focusing on things he would prefer to focus on, the government shutdown doesn't get as much attention. I think he also learned that in that first term shutdown that Michael just referred to, was that, there wasn't the political cost that a lot of people thought there would be. By the time the voters went back to the polls, almost a year and a half, almost 2 years later, there were many, many other issues on their minds than punishing people for the shutdown that had happened at the beginning of 2019. So I don't know that he sees the political cost to this right now. And I think that, he's trying to set an example for the Senate Republicans of just holding firm and not making any move to make any kind of concessions on the assumption that the Democrats will cave. They've thought from the beginning the Democrats would cave, and they've turned out to be wrong about that so far. So it's hard to see where we go from here. It's not hard to see how you could come up with a compromise, but it's hard to see how either party at this point backs down. Neither one seems to be angling to do that.
Which brings me to an interview I did earlier this week that got a lot of views. And it was a woman who ran a New Mexico food bank. And I just asked her simply what she would want lawmakers to know. Here's a small part of what she told me.
I would just really urge all of our Congress people, all of our representatives, our electeds at every level of government to visit a food bank. Stand in that food line, put a box of pinto beans and rice into someone's trunk and see what we see, which is hard hats and public school teacher credentials and car seats.
Obviously, Senator, she got emotional. And she is in the state that has the highest percentage of people who use food stamps. And do you think that there is a lack of understanding among members of Congress? Is there a fear? Is there a political calculation that they feel is more important than this?
I think there's a lack of understanding by some, certainly not all. I can tell you that the lady is right. It's our neighbors that are in the food bank right now. People need help from all walks of life because it's tough in this economy with the inflation that's been occurring. And so that's why, I mean, it's been emphasized throughout these interviews, nobody wins in a shutdown. And that's why folks need to go to the table and negotiate and quit looking at this from a standpoint of who can win politically, because the fact of the matter is the country is losing and both sides will lose politically. And so get to the table, reinstate those subsidies for health insurance so our insurance rates don't go through the roof. That's not a big leap for Republicans and certainly what Democrats have been asking for. And get that done and get the government back opened up again so you don't have a bunch of people that are struggling to feed their family.